WisconsinEye's Campaign 2024 programming is sponsored by Wisconsin Counties Association, Nicolet National Bank, Wisconsin Hospital Association, Operating Engineers Local 139, the Wisconsin Realtors Association, the Wisconsin Laborers District Council, and North Central State's Regional Council of Carpenters. To support programs like this, please consider a tax-deductible donation at wiseye.org/donate or by texting WisEye to 44321.
Elizabeth McCrank of Merrill is the Democratic candidate for the 35th Assembly District. The election is November 5th. Elizabeth McCrank, welcome to WisconsinEye.
Thank you very much. I'm pleased to be here.
Well, thank you for participating in these candidate interviews with us. I'll start by asking you, what's your campaign's key message? Why are you running for this office?
Well, my slogan has been from the very beginning that government is of the people and by the people. It's for the people. And I believe that I represent real choice for a change. I don't think we've had a real choice for a long time for a variety of reasons. There just hasn't really been a lot of motivation. People didn't think that their vote mattered. They didn't think it was going to change anything. And this is the first time in a long time where people feel as though they might actually have a say. And I really, in my time on the Lincoln County Board, I have always tried to make sure that the people's voice gets heard. So I am McCrank for the people.
So if you're elected, what's an example of a bill that would be a priority for you?
Oh, boy. Besides so many. No, the one that's really been hanging over my head. I grew up in the city. I grew up on the east side of Milwaukee. And I moved up here just over 9 years ago, just under 9 years ago, and was welcomed very much by my brother-in-law's family. They're third-generation farmers. The next generation was just born, and they're continuing to work on a family farm. And they've made me absolutely feel like family. So I've learned a lot about the needs and the challenges facing rural people, and particular farmers. And one of the things that makes me really anxious is their access to health care. And while the Affordable Care Act has been helpful for them, it has not really solved all of their problems. Too many of them work a farm during the day and then have to drive to the nearest city in order to get health care as well. So they work two jobs to get the same coverage and the same care that most other people get just from doing one. One way to address that is to restore the pre-2016 levels for the manufacturing and agricultural tax credit. That generated, and it was proven, the research demonstrated this, that generated extra revenue and extra production, both for small businesses and for farmers. And if we could get back down to that level, we generate enough extra resources that we can then expand a healthcare option, a semi-public one, to the farming population. And boy, do they need it. I worry about them all the time. They're good people. They're hardworking people. They shouldn't have to work twice as hard just to get what everyone else gets for one. So I'd start with that tax credit.
So if you're elected to the Assembly, you'll be entering during a biennial budget year, and the state's expected to have more than a $3 billion surplus. What would be your top two priorities for use of that funding?
Well, one of them is we always have to be concerned about the care of the youngest and the oldest people in our population. And the real challenge facing us at both ends of caring for those people is staffing. And so what we need to do is be beefing up the options for training people and staffing those institutions. We may need to adjust and index the revenue that we share with those institutions, whether it is childcare institutions or senior housing or assisted living, and certainly high-level nursing homes, because our population is skewing in that direction, and we have to take care of those people who who cannot take care of themselves.
So you're talking about some spending priorities. What about taxes? Are tax cuts, is tax reform a part of your platform in any way?
It very well could be. I refer back to the manufacturing and agricultural tax credit. That's a tax credit that goes to small business owners, and farmers are small business owners. And those are the people that frequently get left behind when there are big tax credits. There are either, or big tax cuts. There are either enormous tax cuts that favor people at the very top, the top wage earners, and a kind of a reviving of the old trickle-down economics, or there are tax cuts that appear to happen at the bottom, but often are simply adjustments in the withholding. We saw that a few years ago, where a candidate, a president, in fact, did a tax withholding alteration, made it seem like a tax cut for the working people, when in fact they ended up having to pay the taxes at the end of the line anyway. I think we should make them real tax cuts, and they should be for the working people.
What about K-12 education? It's a priority for many voters. Where does that fit within your priorities?
Well, there are two things that I'd really like to see us focusing on. Number one, we need to shore up the public schools, particularly in urban, but also in rural areas. And shoring them up in those two areas is a little bit different in each one. In the case of urban schools, we really do need to make sure that they are safe and that they are up to date, they are functional, so that kids are getting baseline education that is relatively equal no matter what community they live in. We depend upon a public school system to make sure that 2 million people in this state really have the skills to take care of themselves no matter where they end up moving to. At the other end, the rural end, we need to help in the schools out to make sure that they are not forced to over-consolidate. We know that consolidation of schools really takes kids out of their neighborhoods, takes them on long trips. It puts them together with all sorts of people that's great for them, that's good to see, but it moves them away from their home neighborhoods, and they spend way too much time traveling.
Solution, increased funding for across K-12?
Well, it would have to be. It really has to be. And I know some people get upset about that, but I want to remind them that the kids are important, the money is a tool. Money is not going to grow up. Money is something that we earn in order to spend on making the life of our community better. So I don't want to spend it as a profligate, but I also don't think we should starve our schools. We've seen what happens when we starve the schools. People go under.
What about higher education in Wisconsin? Four-year colleges, two-year colleges, technical colleges. What does the future of that whole system look like to you, and what's the legislature's role?
Yeah, I'd like to see a little bit more parity there. I think my own background is dual. I went through university in a very traditional fashion. I went on to graduate school. It was great. I loved it, and I worked in those white-collar jobs for a long time. And then I decided that I wanted a little bit of a different life experience, so I went to vocational school. Where I was living in New England, vocational schools are like the tech schools here in Wisconsin. And I did a trade education, and then I went and I worked in the marine industry for 7.5 years. I think all of these types of education are good value, they're good quality, and we can have apprenticeship programs, we can have licensing programs that expand our healthcare force, but we need a little bit of parity. What we saw was we kind of tilted too far in one direction, and we've seen that a lot of emphasis on tech schools has undermined our two-year campuses as well. We need both of them. So we may have to scale back expectations a little bit at all of our institutions in order to make sure that they are all stable, because we need the whole smorgasbord. College isn't for everyone, tech school isn't for everyone, apprenticeships aren't for everyone. Everybody should have the options.
What's the state's largest workforce development challenge, and how would you propose to address this?
Yeah, it's child care and health care. It's staffing those people and those facilities. And we just, as we see baby boomers, and I'm a penultimate baby boomer, as we see them retire, there sometimes just is no one to fill the jobs that we have open. And our population is really only going to adjust if we have some net migration going. The tricky part to that is net migration is driven by quality of life. So there's a real complex challenge here, but part of it is making our communities accessible to more people, encouraging in-migration from Illinois, from Minnesota. I don't want to cannibalize them. They're good places too, but we can't just leave these jobs empty. And Forward Analytics says by the year 2040, we're going to be 77,000 beds short in assisted care facilities and nursing homes. And that's not the real challenge even. It's that even if we had those beds, we don't have the people to staff them. Same for childcare, same set of things.
Investments in public and energy infrastructure grow our state's economy. This also provides an opportunity to invest in our state's workforce, but currently there are no requirements for hiring local workers. Would you support a state resident hiring requirement for state, local, and utility scale infrastructure investments?
At some level, yes. You have to build in a certain amount of flexibility because, again, if we trap our employers in restrictions that they can't get beyond, then we kill those projects. But we would like to encourage them first to get local workers. We want our own people to be building our own communities. The people who are most affected by the communities do the best work. They've got a stake in it. There's a reason we call them stakeholders, right? So if we could encourage that, if we can incentivize that, and if we can set some levels there where we say, this is what you got to get if you want these other considerations, I think we can do those deals. But I think it's incredibly important that we do that, perhaps without creating new restrictions.
Employee classification is an issue in the construction industry. Some employers misclassify workers as independent contractors or pay them in cash off the books. This lowers costs by avoiding payroll taxes and unemployment insurance, and it puts compliant companies at a disadvantage when bidding on projects. Plus, misclassified workers may be denied minimum wage protections or overtime pay. Are you aware of this issue, and what do you think should be done about it?
Yeah, I'm painfully aware of this. When I got out of vocational school, I worked for a year and a half in light construction, and I worked for great guys, and I learned a ton from them. I saw a lot of our subcontractors. I saw people who were not being treated as well as I was by my employer. I saw people who were hired on sort of day rates, people who were promised one thing when they were hired in the morning, and at the end of the day maybe didn't even get paid there. We need better auditing procedures because in the end, we leave those workers so vulnerable. They're not building up any retirement. They're not putting into the Social Security system. They don't have the health care protections. They don't even have OSHA and type protections. And so this is actually a form of theft. And as I say, I'm painfully aware of it. I've seen it happen to people. And the best way to address it is careful auditing. We don't even need new restrictions. We need to be super smart and watch for the red flags that pop up. I mean, we can compare capacity of companies, and when companies are getting more work done than their payroll demonstrates that they could have done, it's like getting on a turnpike and you are between turnpike toll booths in such a small amount of time that you could not possibly have been going the speed limit. And so when you see those sorts of red flags, and that's done by auditing, we need to then be taking a look at what's happening, because those companies, they're not just ripping off their employees, they're ripping off the entire state.
Affordable rental housing is an issue in Wisconsin. Some support government-imposed rent control to maintain affordability, while others argue keeping rent artificially low will decrease rental supply, resulting in increased prices. What is your sense of housing as an issue, and which best addresses rental housing affordability? Is it rent control, or building more rentals, or some other solution?
Yeah, well, this is it's an interesting thing. I lived in a place for a long time that had rent control, and it worked very well for some people. But there also were legendary stories, and you would meet people who were living in really fabulous circumstances at sub-market rates, and they had long since ceased to actually qualify for them. So, when you do too much of that interference, you encourage people to kind of, create these contortions and twist themselves to get around things. There's always going to be somebody who's clever and gets around them. I think we're better off building more rental properties, but I think we also have to be very careful about how we license that and how we let absentee landlords or rental corporations manage those properties. I think, if a property gets too big and becomes very corporate, we lose that sense of home ownership. We lose that sense of connection to the place. And renters don't always then take good care of their property. I think what we really want to do is build a sort of a rent-to-own system where people who want to ultimately be homeowners have a pathway to do it. And it may not be the traditional mortgage, but those options are worth exploring anyway.
Medical systems are facing numerous headwinds in the form of inflation, workforce development, and issues around Medicare and Medicaid reimbursement, resulting in fewer services and even the closure of a hospital system in western Wisconsin. What would you do to preserve access to care and prevent future closures?
Yeah, this is again a very local issue for me. This is what inspired me to run in this race. Is that my opponent was on the county board at the time 3 years ago and made a motion to sell the county-owned nursing home, which we have had for over three quarters of a century. And my response to it was, let's let the people weigh in on this, because this is not a routine issue. This is a big deal, and we need to know if people want us to commit more resources to this. So I made a resolution for a referendum. My opponent actually was the person who squashed it. He tabled it indefinitely and said a referendum was unnecessary. I think we do need to bring the people into this conversation and find out if they'd like us to commit more resources, because short of committing resources, both for creating those beds, but also for training the people and encouraging people to move in to do those jobs, I don't know how we are going to address the needs of what is sort of ballooning at the top, the older population.
So a statewide referendum on increasing funding for rural health care?
Well, that would be one way to address that. Another way to do it, of course, is looking at the Medicaid supplemental payments that are made to nursing homes and hospitals. It's a very, very murky formula. People don't understand it. I've looked into it over and over and over again, and I still don't feel confident talking about it too much in public. But there is a formula there for evening things out. And much like the way the levy limits kind of strangled rural communities and rewarded communities that may be overdeveloped, the supplemental payment system seems to reward facilities that overspend at the expense of facilities that practice good fiscal management. So we need to revisit that supplemental payment system, make it more transparent, and reward organizations that really are being responsible and caring for their people and their budgets.
What about mental health care? It's a growing concern for many Wisconsinites for state and county budgets. What are you hearing on that issue, and what needs to be done about it?
Yeah, well, that's a great question, because I think mental health care is the root cause of so many other issues that we need to be concerned about. And we could bring the temperature down in our country considerably if we would be doing more preventive health care in the mental health field. So what do we do about this? It needs to be treated, first of all, like any other health care issue. So if we're going to support hospitals, we need to make sure that we support hospitals that have mental health care facilities. We need a certain amount of liaising between law enforcement and the healthcare profession, because we know that, look, police officers are not trained to be interveners in mental health care situations, and yet that often is exactly what is needed and can de-escalate a situation. So we really need to be integrating mental health services into many more walks of our official life, and we need to treat it as like it was any other healthcare issue, not separate at all.
How should Wisconsin move forward on the issue of abortion?
Well, Declaration of Independence says, we hold these truths to be self-evident. Everybody has the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Everybody, right? And that means any group in the population has to have the same rights as every other group. We have equal rights. And if there's one set of people that you can take rights away from and say, you don't get to make decisions about your body anymore, this is not just and I know many people characterize it as a women's issue, right? But it's not. What it is, for me, is it's a thin edge of a wedge. Once you establish that you can take rights away from one set of people, don't think you can't take them away from other sets of people too. So I'm 61 years old. I'm never going to have an abortion. And when I was younger, I was probably never going to choose to have one. The operative word there is choose, right? And I'm not going to make the decision for somebody else. They have to make that decision, and they get to make that decision for themselves. But I'm also not going to let anyone take your rights away. his rights away, his rights away, her rights away. I am going to stand for everybody to have those equal rights, and I think this is an equal rights issue.
Should there be any number of weeks as a limit?
No. And I want to be clear about that. Look, people talk a lot, and if you've been listening to debates, we talk a lot about these failed abortions and ninth month pregnancies. First of all, it's so rare. It's so rare. It's really a medical emergency when those things happen, and they're really not choices that people make. That is like falling off a cliff. Those are, I don't think anybody, I would challenge anyone to find me a person who went into a healthcare facility and they're in the 9th month of their pregnancy and wanted to have a procedure like that happen. So that is a problem. But when it does happen, it's because really medical professionals are scrambling to try and save whomever they can. And again, I'm not going to get in the way of that.
What are the pressing transportation needs in your district, and how important is it that these are addressed and for the state to keep on schedule with the reconstruction of aging interstates and significant corridors of commerce?
Yeah, well, for my district, it's rural roads, it's rural road maintenance, it's culvert replacement, and the state has been generous. They help us out. They give subsidies for that. We're able to assist towns with that sort of thing, but we have to keep it up, and it's never going to be done. So unfortunately, that it's like eating dinner. You just because you do it today doesn't mean you're not going to have to do it tomorrow. We are going to have to keep doing that. And this protects our farmers. If the rural roads are not functional, they might as well just stop farming because they can't get their products to market. So anything that we do, forestry or farming, corn, livestock, whatever, we have to have those rural roads maintained at a functional level for all the seasons that we have. And we can't assume that last winter was a normal winter.
PFAS and other water contaminants are a concern for a growing number of Wisconsinites. Do you see this as an important issue, and how would you propose to address it?
Yeah, boy, the more I learn about PFAS, the more frustrating this is because it's such an enormous issue. And of course, we all want, we don't just want clean water, we need clean water. The damage that it does to people over time is significant. But I confess this is one where we got to keep looking at it. We have to keep making efforts because it is so big that the cleanup is going to be going on for a long, long time. And where we start, well, we better start sooner than later because it's not going to go away on its own. But even if we can only do small and incremental things, that's something. And if that's what we have to do to get started, then that's what we have to do.
We're down to our final 2 questions. How would you describe the leading differences between you and your opponent?
Yeah. Life experience. I started working when I was 16 years old. I started bussing tables at a supper club on the North Shore, east side of Milwaukee, and I worked all the way through college. I worked in graduate school. I sometimes worked 2 jobs. I worked right up until the Great Recession. Then I was out of work, as almost everybody was. And the only job I could find, a friend pulled strings for me and got me a job sacking groceries in a grocery store on Sundays to cover everyone else's lunch shift. That's all they would give me. So it was 1 day a week, but it got me out of the house. It meant I was making some money. I was making $8 an hour, right? I have a doctorate. All work is honorable. I was grateful for the job. I worked all the way through, and I've been doing that all my life. I moved to Merrill 9 years ago. I got a job at the library. I worked in public service. I've spent years teaching. I've always been working. My opponent, well, he's young, and he went directly from high school into politics, didn't go into the military, didn't go to college, doesn't seem to have gotten a job outside of politics. Now, the good news is that's not a character flaw. It's fixable. All you have to do is gain life experience. But I believe that my life experience allows me to make good decisions for the people of the district because I've faced the same challenges they have. And when my opponent has faced those challenges too, then we'll be equal.
Final question. If you're elected this fall and you get a magic wand you can use in the state capitol to resolve one issue in a way that brings all parties together, what is that one issue?
Boy. Well, making it an issue is hard because what I'd like to do with my magic wand is wave it over everyone and elevate the level of discourse dramatically, to make it issue-oriented, real issue-oriented, not sort of hysterical culture war, outrage issues. We need to be talking about child care. We need to be talking about elder care. We need to be talking about schools, and we need to talk about what we do about our roads. I don't think what we need to talk about is whatever pops up on the shows that appear after the news and are designed to get people all outraged and worked up. Those so-called issues affect tiny, tiny, tiny little portions of the population and almost never the people in my district. So I would like to wave my wand and talk about real things and talk about them substantively. You can disagree with me. In fact, I love when people disagree with me. I'm a fan of the adversarial system, but we have to talk about substance. We can't just be talking about, culture wars.
Well, thank you, Elizabeth McCrank of Merrill, the Democrat candidate for the 35th Assembly District. The election is November 5th. Elizabeth McCrank, thank you for talking with WisconsinEye.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it greatly.
This programming is brought to you by our generous sponsors. Thank you for watching.